Hi, it's Anna. Welcome back to Books on the Go. I'm doing a DNF video today. So these are all the books I have DNF'd recently, and I've just been going through a phase where I don't have much patience for books, and it's not that most of them are really good, actually, beautifully written books, but I'm wanting more of a story and just to be entertained. And so for whatever reason, maybe because I'm going through books on my shelf, and so they are books that have been sitting there for a while, and maybe that is part of the reason that I've hesitated to pick them up, because maybe I knew that it wouldn't work. But nevertheless, you have to be ruthless sometimes. So the first one, which I really wanted to love, is Song of the Crocodile by Nardi Simpson. And this is a multi-generational story of an Aboriginal family in the north of Australia, in a fictional town called Darnmore. 3 generations of the family, and then they're dealing with the violence of the past. Then there are rapid environmental changes, and then the town's secrets get exposed. So this is really beautifully written, and it sets the scene. It gives you a lot of scenery, the coolabah trees, the tea water, the water that's the colour of tea of the river, and the characters going about their daily lives. And what I found was that it just moved too slowly. And also the tone is quite subdued because it's a bleak story. And Annie did warn me that it's bleak, and then it's just bleak, bleak, bleak. So I don't mind that, but the fact that it was also moving slowly meant that I just didn't want to pick it up. And so I wasn't wanting to get back to it. I tried a few times, and I'm just going to have to let it go now. So I know that Sean Mooney's keen to read it. So Sean, this is coming your way, and I'll be dying to hear what you think. And I know that I'm in the minority. I think a lot of people have really loved this, and the writing, as I said, is beautiful. So I recommend it for that, but for me, I'm letting it go. It's going to be a DNF. So that's Song of the Crocodile. And then one that unfortunately wasn't as well written, but I think it's a debut novel, is a crime novel called The Khan by Sama Mir. And I'm still wanting to read a good crime novel, because I think when you're in that mood for just a really good page turner, that will often do the trick. And so I picked this up. It sounded intriguing. It's about Gina Khan, who is a successful London lawyer, but her father was the head of the Pakistani crime syndicate in North London, but then he's murdered, and she has to go back and take over. This is on the blurb, it's not a plot spoiler. She has to go back and take his place. So quite an intriguing premise, but it moves slowly and it's not that well written. So I was starting to get annoyed with the clunky writing, and I had to let it go. So there's a scene early on where there's a lot of name checking to show that Gina Khan is a successful lawyer with material wealth. There's a lot of, she has the Birkin bag and the Savile Row jacket, and then there's the scent of Jo Malone, because she's burning a candle. And that just it's a small thing, but it just annoyed me, because Jo Malone is the brand, and yes, of course she might have a Jo Malone candle, but the scent would be whatever that candle is. So it would be, patchouli or cedar or whatever. So it just didn't ring true, and it was too listy. There was too many brand names just being ticked off to give you the idea that yes, she's successful. And I think you could just have one and that would be enough, or you could do it in another way and maybe that would give you the idea. But in any case, then it was also moving too slowly and nothing had really happened. And so I'm just seeing at what point I gave up on it. Yeah, so there's this bit with her father's point of view. There were things to discuss and things to reveal. Time had taken too much. It could not be allowed to take any more. Tomorrow he would start anew. But what does that mean? It's just very slow. Annie was also trying to read it, and she said after the sort of first 100 pages, I think the father still hadn't been murdered. So that still hadn't even happened, let alone what is the mystery that we're solving, I suppose, which there was no sign of that. as yet, so I couldn't really get on with it, but I really wanted to like it because it sounded like a fresh take on a London sort of crime novel. So that was The Khan. Let me know if you did read this, if it maybe gets better, and I would be interested because I think this is a debut. This is one where, you know, I'd be interested to read her next book maybe, but this one wasn't for me. So then we have Insurrecto by Gina Apostol, and again I wanted to love this. Gina Apostol came to Adelaide Writers Week in 2019 and I bought the book. It's been waiting on my shelf, and what drew me to this was that it's the story of a Filipino translator and an American filmmaker go on a road trip through Duterte's Philippines. And that really intrigues me. So two women, one's Filipina and one is an American, sort of like a Sofia Coppola character where she's a filmmaker, her father was a filmmaker. He also had made a movie set in the Philippines back in the 1970s. And so you can see a parallel there. You get a sense of the sort of character she is, the existence that she's, you know, her upbringing and the culture clash. And then along the way, the idea is that you learn a lot about the state of the Philippines now, but also the history. And the Philippines has a really interesting history. And I was all in for that road trip. I was ready. I was fascinated to read about this and to the two women and the characters as well. But actually the way this book is structured and written is much more meta, and it does say that in the blurbs, so I was aware of that, but it's more esoteric and it's more, it's more story within stories and you don't quite know where you are because it also goes back in time to Chiara, the filmmaker's past, or her parents' story, so Ludo and his wife, I think Virginie, and then, but it's not clear where they are or what the relevance is of that. I'm sure it becomes clear if you keep going. And the chapter headings are like the first chapter, part 1, a mystery, is chapter 20. Yeah, so it's just very meta and it's not a straightforward road trip story, which I think could have been amazing. It's more high level and it just needs a lot more work from the reader to understand what's going on and before you can then appreciate the story. So I couldn't get on with that. I didn't have the patience to do that work. The writing is good, but because I couldn't understand I couldn't really follow what was going on, I wasn't then engaged with it. So I couldn't follow with any of the characters because it was changing and it wasn't clear if you were reading what was happening or if you were reading a film script, sort of a film idea or something fictional in their life. It was all a little bit too meta for me, I think. And so that meant I wasn't in the story and I wasn't engaged with what was happening. So I had to let that one go as well. That was Insurrecto. Then a book that I bought on a whim, Fury by Kathryn Heyman. So this is a non-fiction and it's the story of Kathryn Heyman going through a terrible sexual assault trial as a victim or survivor and also a witness, and then taking herself onto a fishing trawler as a deckhand in the Timor Sea. So I was very excited to read that, sort of the story set on the sea, and was really interested in what would unfold, and with the background of this awful sexual assault trial. And it had amazing blurbs by some of my favourite authors. So Carrie Tiffany says utterly compelling. Bree Lee has called it white hot. Claire Wright, vitally important. Anna Funder, a personal and literary triumph. And they're all authors whose work I have really enjoyed. So I went into it with the beautiful cover and great premise, and it wasn't really what I thought it was going to be. So she's a really strong writer. The writing is great, but it was quite a depressing book to read because you do get the sexual assault trial and the lead up to the events that led up to that, which are very harrowing and it's just depressing to see it all happen and sort of see it all unfold, and knowing obviously that it doesn't end well, and it's sort of a hot mess. And yeah, the perpetrator, obviously terrible criminal, and that's all quite depressing. And then rather than then switching to the fishing trawler, it's more about her going back into her past sort of friendships and things that happened at school. I sort of lost, it sounds terrible to say I lost interest a bit, but I wasn't enjoying reading it, so I sort of skimmed through and just went to the last few bits that are at sea, and a really sort of dangerous time that she had there in terms of just the ocean being dangerous. And I just found it depressing. It was like watching someone whose life has really unraveled, and yeah, everything she does is sort of doesn't go well. And so I just didn't enjoy that, and it was a bit different to what I thought it was going to be. So I think it lost a bit of momentum, but good writing. So that was Fury by Kathryn Heyman. And then one that I'm still struggling with, and I don't want to give it up yet, is The Swan Book by Alexis Wright. So this is an Aboriginal Australian story. Alexis Wright is one of our foremost Aboriginal authors, and it's sort of partly told in a metaphoric sort of way, but we have set in the future an Aboriginal community living on the swamp. There's a mute girl called Oblivia who has come from a tree trunk, and there are swans, and then there's Belladonna, an old woman who has taken her in, and there's the intervention is still going on, which is where the government comes in and controls what Aboriginal communities can do, where they can live, and so on. And so it's quite dystopic, but that's okay in the sense that the tone of the writing is really playful. It's quite funny. She's got a great sense of humour, and the writing is superb. She's an incredible writer. So I'm all in for that, and that's kept me going. But the problem is I don't know what's going on. It's because it is just not told in a traditional Western style of a novel. I don't have a sense of what's really happening, and indeed not much is happening. It's not a plot-driven book, so it's hard to engage, and it's hard to want to keep picking it up because I'm a bit lost, and I'm happy to keep pushing through and be a bit lost for a while, but I'm not sure how long I should keep going. So I think I'm about 60 or 70 pages in, but the writing is keeping me there at the moment, so we'll see. So that's The Swan Book by Alexis Wright. And there we have it, quite a few books that I've DNF'd this month. Let me know what you've been reading. If you have any crime recommendations for me or anything that you've DNF'd recently, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So I will see you soon. Bye for now.